Ravnica City of Guilds, released October 7th in 2005, was a giant over 300 card expansion set for Magic the Gathering. One of the most famous sets of all time, original Ravnica brought with it a ton of memorable and impactful mechanics, keywords, and cycles, many of which were seen for the first time. Original Ravnica introduced the Guilds, the official two-color pairs of Magic, giving each of them a name, a theme, a philosophy, something that hadn't been done in Magic up to this point. The set focused on 4 guilds in particular: the Boros Legion, which came with Radiance as a new mechanic, House Dimir, a secretive guild that came with a transmute mechanic, the Golgari Swarm that brought Dredge to Magic and forever changed the Eternal landscape, and finally the Selesnya Conclave, which brought Convoke into the game. As you can see, between these 4 guilds alone, Magic would be impacted forever, a truly important set. In addition to all this goodness, Ravnica introduced one of the most important dual land cycles ever, the Shocklands. The first attempt at true dual lands since the original duels themselves. It also included the cycle of Bounce Lands, which many players adored. Fun fact, Ravnica was the home of the Hunted cycle, so if you've ever had to play against Hunted Horror, you can blame Ravnica. And then last, but certainly not least, hybrid mana symbols, that's right. OG Ravnica was the home, and wow did it take advantage. Shadow of Doubt and Privileged Position, just to name a few of the strong hybrid cards from the first set of the Ravnican block. With all that said, let's take a look at what the prices of Ravnican cards were like when the set was first released. This is always fun. These prices are from November of 2005, a few weeks after the set came out. On release, the most expensive cards in the set were the Shocklands, surprise, surprise. Overgrown Tomb and Watery Grave were $18 each, while Sacred Foundry and Temple Garden were $15 each. Remember, only 4 guilds were supported in the first set, so those are the Shocklands that were included. Everyone knew the power of the lands as soon as they were announced. Having basic land types works with fetch lands, so value. Next to the Shocks, the most expensive card in the set was Birds of Paradise at $14. Not only did the card have new Ravnica artwork, but it was a mana-fixing card in a multicolor matter set. In addition, this was still during a time where Birds of Paradise was an expensive card. It's been printed into oblivion now and is still quite expensive, but not as expensive as it was then. After that, we have a steep drop down to $10 where Glimpse the Unthinkable and Seersu Dimir Lobotomist are. This is the first time Wizards went 100% into mill as a strategy and players loved it. Seersu reads as a crazy prison card, and milling that much at one time on Glimpse reminded players of Traumatized and just how much work that card did. Lots of hype over Dimir Mill when the set first comes out, real interesting. Now believe it or not, nothing else in Ravnica was particularly expensive on release. Let's chat about Ravnica's impact on Standard though, this is gonna be sweet. To really appreciate the impact Ravnica made on Standard, it's important to understand the type of Standard format it was coming into. Before Ravnica released, Standard was made up of 8th edition for a bit, replaced by 9th edition, then Mirrodin, Darksteel, 5th Dawn, Champions of Kamigawa, Betrayers of Kamigawa, and Saviors of Kamigawa. With Affinity mostly banned out, Standard was actually kind of nuts. Thanks to 8th and 9th edition, Urza lands were in Standard for some time, making room for Tooth and Nail as a Tier 1 deck. The strategy utilized the Urza lands in cards like Sylvan Scrying and Kodama's Reach to get enough mana to entwine Tooth and Nail, then play Sundering Titan or Platinum Angel or Triskelion and wreck the opponent. The other Tier 1 deck at the time was Mono Red Aggro, incredibly explosive, using Chrome Mox and Seething Song to ramp to nonsense like Molten Rain, Stone Rain, Slith, Firewalker, Zozu the Punisher, and more. Deck was brutal and more or less dominated Standard up until Ravnica release. Now, hilariously, the last noteworthy deck that turned out to be problematic, Rats. Not even kidding. Thanks to Kamigawa, Standard had access to Ink Eyes, Nezumi Shortfang, Umizawa's Jite, Ether Vial. The deck was a black tempo Pox deck, super weird. Ran a bunch of Rats, Persecute, Pithing Needle, so weird but incredibly strong. Now, of course, Ravnica City of Guilds was about to rotate in, and Standard would never be the same. Now, when rotation happens, Standard loses Mirrodin, Darksteel, 5th Dawn, and 8th edition a few months before that, leaving a format of Champions, Betrayers, and Saviors of Kamigawa alongside only 9th edition. Ravnica rotates in right before a 2005 championship series, and while only a few months prior there were a couple dominant decks, new Standard brought a wide range of strategies to the forefront of the format, and by wide range, I mean basically a billion different decks. We're talking a Standard format almost as healthy as any we've seen. scene. Thanks to the introduction of the Shocklands and Guild Location lands, powerful Kamigawa creatures were given the mana support they needed to truly shine. That's what Standard started out as. Tons of Kamigawa nonsense supported by solid mana and spells. Here are some examples. One of the most popular strategies at the beginning of the format was a black-green shell, consisting of Overgrown Tomb, Shizo, Death's Storehouse, Okina, Temple to the Grandfathers, and more assorted Shocklands, with an accompaniment of awesome legendary creatures like Kagemaru, First to Suffer, Kokosho the Evening Star, Kaiga the Tide Star, and Myojin of Night's Reach. I kid you not. These giant cards became staples of early Ravnican Standard. With newcomer spells like Putrefy, Last Gasp, and Compulsive Research, these decks became incredibly streamlined very quickly. Now you'd think that after a month and a half, the Standard format would settle down at least a little bit, but nope, not even. World Yokohama took place at the end of November in 2005, almost 2 months after Ravnica's release. And while it was a mixed event Worlds, the Standard portion was well documented. Of all of the undefeated Standard decks, not even 2 of them shared a strategy. The first was an Obzan control deck running Kagemaru, Kokosho, and Yosei, supported by Goryo's Vengeance, Greater Good, Wrath of God, and Sensei's Divining Top. The second undefeated deck was Sultai, played Maloku, the Cloud and Mirror, Kodama of the North Tree, and Kaiga, supported by Hinder, Jite, and Time of Need. I'm not even joking. The third undefeated deck was a pure blue-red Urza land control deck. We're talking Compulsive Research, Confiscate, Blaze to win the game, and Telling Time. It was so weird. Then, completely out of left field, the last undefeated World Standard deck can only be described as Selesnya Ramp Control. Arashi the Sky Asunder, Loxodon Hierarch, Selesnya Guildmage, and Yosei, supported by Congregation at Dawn, Glare of Subdual, Seed Spark, and Jite. As you can see, there was no consensus as to what the most powerful deck was. There was, however, a consensus as to the best cards out of Ravnica for Standard. This shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, but the Shocklands were the biggest players in Standard. We all know them as eternal staples now, but they were pivotal to Ravnica Standard way back when, demanding a high premium and inclusion in most every strategy that wasn't monocolored. And while I would love to tell you that this is where it ended and Ravnican Standard was great forever, I technically can't do that. We haven't talked about it yet, but remember Dark Confidant? Yeah. That card was from original Ravnica, and while most players didn't pay attention to it when the set first came out, some pros did, and they created a monster of a strategy around it. White-black aggro became a powerhouse in the Standard format, running alongside Hand of Cruelty, Hand of Honor, and Ravenous Rats with Umezawa's Jite and Phyrexian Arena backup. We'll talk about it in a future video, but the later editions of Ghost Council of Orzhova and Mortify would truly propel this deck to Tier 1 status. Now, the white-black deck wasn't the only boogeyman of the format. Izzet strategies were built and tuned like the previous Izzet Urzatron deck, except this time no Tron. Using cards like Maloku and Kaiga, players won games by supporting these strong spells with Tidings, Hinder, Remand, and Rewind. Thanks to the later addition of Steam Vents and the inclusion of 9th edition Fixer Shivan Reef, the blue-red control deck would sit right next to the white-black aggro deck for some time. But again, that's for another video. What's important to point out here is that New Standard was incredibly diverse when Ravnica came out, with players focusing on tons of different color combinations and builds, mixing together Ravnican support spells with powerful Kamigawa creatures. To be completely honest, this format was outstandingly fun, and I wish we could go back. Kamigawa gets a ton of crap, but after Mirrodin was no longer in the picture, heckin' fun with Ravnica. There are a few other things worth mentioning in regards to Ravnica City of Guilds. First, it's considered to be one of the best limited formats of all time. Not only is Ravnica Guild Pack Dissension touted as an incredible draft format, Triple Ravnica is also beloved. Thanks to the incredible design of Mark Rosewater and Richard Garfield, original Ravnica has gone down in history as being one of the best sets of Magic ever, helping to bring the game back from a huge downturn thanks to Kamigawa. Pretty much anyone you talk to who played during original Ravnica, they'll tell you everyone loved the set, the plane, the guilds, everything. In addition to the immense impact Ravnica had on Standard, Limited, and the history of Magic in general, it would also come to shape what is now known as Commander. Ravnica is one of the most flavorful sets of all time, so when you see cards like Razia, Zadek, Sisters of Stone Death, Chorus of the Conclave, Seersu, Savra, Tolsimir, and Agris, alongside the beginnings of the Guild Mana Rock cycles, the Signets, you can understand just how impactful this set and block were for the Commander format. Even the Shocklands, Guild Mages, and bounce lands from each set in each guild, immensely important to the health and satisfaction of Commander. I cannot stress enough just how much the idea of Ravnica helped shape what Commander is today. Without this plane, I have no idea where the format would be, to be honest. You gotta respect it. Let's take a look at the cards we spoke about at the beginning of the video and see where they're at now. The most expensive cards in Ravnica were the shock lands, and for good reason. Tomb, Grave, Garden, and Foundry were all between $15 and $18 each on release, and while that price has gone down, that's only because they've been reprinted multiple times now. Birds of Paradise was $15 on release, in part due to that artwork, wowza. This card is now half that price, but as a staple whenever it's in Standard, I can't argue with the cost on release. Seersu was $10 due to the unique and seemingly powerful ability, but now it sits at a much lower $2.50. And Glimpse the Unthinkable was incredibly expensive until Iconic Masters and is now a mere $4. And while this may not seem exciting, let's look at what's expensive in the set now and where it started back in 2005. Dark Confidant is $60 right now. The card is a staple all over the place, and while players did eventually catch on to its power in Standard when it first released, $5. And the only reason it was that high is because it was the pro player created card. Those always held some value for players. Next we have Doubling Season at $44. A prime example of just how impactful Commander can be on prices. Because when Doubling Season first came out, it was a bulk rare, literally worth 50 cents, if that. Card was worthless. Then we have Life from the Loam, $30 now because Dredge is just outrageous. On release, another bulk rare. Less than $1, not even worth including in price guides, ugh. And lastly, the next most expensive card in the set right before the shock lands is Privileged Position. Another Commander staple, another card worth nothing on release, more bulk. I could do this all day. Court of Calling was $2 on release, worth more now. Cloudstone Curio was nothing on release, over $15. Copy Enchantment, literally 10 cents on release, $15 now. Big lesson. Commander Warp's card prices more than any other format, just wow. We finally made it to the end, considering everything we knew back then and everything we know now, which is truly the best card in Magic out of Ravnica City of Guilds. Of course, there's an argument to be made for many cards. Doubling Season is powerful and nothing does what it does, but it's still only conditionally good in a single format. Wouldn't really call that best material. How about Dark Confidant? Surely this must be the best card, right? Nearly universally playable in all formats, a trigger that most all players would want all the time. Helped to dominate Standard, Modern, Legacy, and even Vintage for a time. It has to be this, right? I don't think so. What about Life from the Loam or the Dredge mechanic in general? Real strong. Format defining. Wizards admitted it was a mistake to make in the first place. Definitely has to be this, right? Nope. The best card in Ravnica is actually a cycle of cards, the Shock Lands, of course. Thanks to the Shock Lands existing, Eternal formats might actually survive. With the reserve list strongly intact, we're never getting original dual lands ever again, and these are simply the closest we're going to get to them. Shock Lands have defined mana bases in almost all formats, and lowered the barrier to entry for older formats where dual lands are simply inaccessible. They matter too much to the game to even consider other cards for this list, so there you go. Best cards in Ravnica, Shock Lands. I hope you've enjoyed this trip down memory lane, and if you want more videos in this series, please let me know which sets you'd like me to cover. If you see someone else comment a set you want, be sure to give it a thumbs up so I know what you want. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. This video is brought to you in part by TCGplayer.com. We've been talking a lot about Shocklands, and wow, is this the perfect time to buy some? With Guilds of Ravnica recently released, these delicious lands are everywhere at great prices. Need a watery grave? Because you can get one right now on TCG Player for $8. It's $8 for a copy of one of the most powerful lands in the entire game. It's hard to say no. If you want in, click the link on the screen. Helps the channel a bunch, means a lot. I hope you get everything you want for good prices. I believe in you. Enjoy.